Howdy guys, and welcome to part 4 of this HDA tutorial series on creating a procedural barrel. So in this video we're going to start taking a look at how we can approach creating some UVs for procedural assets. So let's go ahead and dive right in, and we're going to start looking at the core of our barrel first, so that will be the staves. So we're going to look at how we can create unique UVs for each stave that makes up the body of our barrel. So let's dive into our stave subnet here. And let's start taking a look and see what happens if we just throw a UV unwrap on our staves. And I'm going to split my screen up a little bit to make this easier to see some stuff. So we'll split this left and right, and I'm going to go ahead and make this my UV view. And then I'm going to split this left and right as well, so I can have some quick access to my parameters to see how my parameters affect my UVs. Alright, so now we'll see, I've got this UV unwrap, and it actually seems to be working okay. But it's not doing the greatest, and we're getting a lot of small pieces. It seems to be cutting off the ends and the top here, and it's bending, which will make it weird for having a wood seam, because we're going to want eventually some kind of wood material down the length of our stave. And having this deformations here will make that wood warp, which is not how the material would look in real life, or even a stylized version. So UV unwrap probably isn't going to work out for us. I'm going to go ahead and add a quick shade so we can see this warping happening. So it's not really too bad. The warping is a little bit, we can see how, like, if this were a straight material, these the wood would seem to, if we had vertical wood grains, it would just start cutting off here as it went up. And in reality, the wood would just get bowed out right here. As well as on the sides, we would get some stretching, and this wouldn't run in line with our grain either. So a UV unwrap is probably not what we're going to want to use. So to fix this bowing problem and make it run in line with our wood grain, we can actually go ahead and step above where we have our curve. So we could actually start working with our UVs while our stave is straight. Let's probably go down to where it's centered. This is a good place to start. So from here, we can actually copy this stave thickness, and we'll paste it down over here, and we'll get the same thickness of our staves, but without any of the bow referencing here. And we're probably going to want to do a UV flatten. And we're going to want this to flatten around the edges here on our stave. And we can try doing this manually. And I'll press 3 and start selecting my edges, and I'll select this loop, and this guy is down here, and maybe separate these inside pieces in the corner so I have the inside separate from the outside, because that won't really matter too much. I'll hit enter, and we'll get this nice unwrap here. Oh, looks like I missed an edge, so we'll select that and modify it. Alright, there we go. That's cleaner. So that looks actually pretty good, and if we put a quick shade down, we'll see that we're actually getting nice straight UVs going up and down the length of our stave. However, we'll notice that as we modify the number of staves, our UVs actually will disappear or warp crazily. This is obviously not going to work, and this is because the group for our seam group for our UV flatten is hard selecting point numbers, but our point numbers we'll see are actually changing based off of the number of staves that I have. So I'm going to need to probably create a bounding box or short expression to group the edges of my stave so that I'm always grouping the edges that I had to manually select before for my UV unwrap. So to do that, let's just move this stuff down. We'll go ahead and delete this seam group right there. And we'll make a new group node. And in this group, I'm going to call this UV seams. And this will be stave seams for my group name. Let's get rid of that space. And we don't want a base group. We're actually going to want to include by edges. And our group type is going to be edges as well. And here, we can probably group by minimum edge angle, which is the difference in angle from one edge to another. And because we have a slight bow in our stave amount here, because of the shape, its shape as a tube, we can probably select by minimum edge angle. And see that's already kind of working just with the default 20. But if we go ahead and increase this number, eventually we'll start getting just the edges that we need. And it looks like 87, slightly less than 90 degrees, is about what we want. So let's drop this down to 87, and we'll see how this is working with the different bow amounts. And it looks like it's doing okay. The height won't make any difference really, but we'll check it just in case. Yeah, that looks like it's doing alright. And I'm just hitting Control and middle mouse button to reset my parameters to their default values. And so now that we have our UV seams group, we can go back to our flatten, and we'll just add that as our seam group for our UVs. And then we'll take a look at our quick shade, and we'll notice that now I can increase or decrease the number of staves and the height, and I get nice UV spread across my entire stave. So after we get our UV flattened, we can do a layout and get rid of this space in between here. For light maps, we would want to keep a space here, but for the material maps, we don't actually need that space. So to save up on room, we'll do a layout, and we'll just reduce the padding to 0, and that'll help keep this straighter and closer together. And after we get that layout, we're going to need a transform so that for my material, I like the wood grain going vertically, so up and down. So I'm going to want to rotate my staves to go up and down as well. So we'll do a UV transform here, and we're going to rotate this by -90. And then we're going to need to change the scale so that it scales appropriately to our index, our UV coordinates. And we'll see this is now working as we want. But we're getting some weird distortions with our scale as it changes. That's not too bad. So that may not end up being an issue. But as it gets higher, I want my wood grain to stay the same scale, because I don't want my wood grain to get bigger as my stave gets taller. So we're actually going to want to modify this scale so that we maintain a nice square shape as our stave increases in height. And to do that, we actually can use the fit function and rescale this on a range of 0 to 1 based off of my height. So I'm actually going to copy my height parameter here, and we'll do a negative fit because I still need it to go in the negative direction. And I'm going to paste my reference to my height, and we'll go from 1 to 5 because that's the min and max parameters of my height function, height parameter. And we'll go from something like 0.5 to 1. Like that. That's looking better. It's almost square. They're still a little elongated. Let's make this a little bit smaller and do to 3. We're still getting a little elongated, but it's looking good up there. Okay, so we're actually going to copy this, and we'll paste that right there. And we'll take the inverse of it so that it sets back there. And now we're getting nice, relatively continuous square UVs as we increase the height of our stave, and as well as when we decrease the number of staves that we have. That's exactly the kind of behavior that we want for our UVs. So now we have a conundrum. I've got, don't need this UV unwrap anymore, but I've got this bowed stave right here and my straight stave right here, but my straight stave has the UVs and my bowed stave does not. But because we're not actually manipulating the, we're not adding new points to our geometry, we can actually take an attribute copy, and we will just copy the UV attributes from our straight UVs, our straight stave, to our bowed stave. And so on our attribute copy, we'll see that we're not getting the results that we want right now. Instead of the attribute to copy, we'll set to texture UV. And now, even as we modify the bow amount of our staves, we're getting a really nice, very little distortion and straight UVs for our staves. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this quick shade right here. And we'll notice that if I go up and we'll look at the revolve for our barrel, I start decrease or increase the number of staves. I'm getting a little bit of lag here while I change the number of staves for my barrel. And that's because UV operations generally take a fair amount of time to compute. And one way that I like making procedural HDAs that I'm working with faster is by adding an option to my HDAs to toggle my UV generation on or off. So we're actually going to go up to my HDA and go to the type properties. And we'll go to parameters, and I'll just add a new folder over here, and I'll call this UV folder and UVs. We'll make this a simple folder, and then I'm going to add a toggle to this folder, and the toggle I'm going to call toggle UVs and UVs for the label, and we'll leave it by default turned off or 0. And we'll hit apply, and we'll accept this. And now I've got a toggle that I can use to switch between my UV generation. So I'm going to copy this parameter, and we'll go back into our UVs channel here. And I'm just going to add a switch to the bottom of my staves output, and bring my attribute copy in as the second input. And I'll paste my relative reference to my toggle UVs here on my switch. And now my stave does not have UVs, and I can toggle my UVs on or off. So let's go ahead and leave UVs on so we can see what we're doing, and take a look at how we can address this massive overlapping of UVs for our revolve. This may not be a problem if what you want is to have each stave have the same UV set. They'll all look exactly the same because the UVs are all exactly the same in the same place on our UV map. But to avoid the uniformity that I would get from doing my UVs this way, I actually want to offset my UVs by the length of, or the width of my UV space, and maybe a little bit more to add the space between them, for every new copy or every new stave that I have. So to do that, we are actually going to let's move these guys up and give ourselves a little bit of room. to work. And we're going to make a quick little for each loop so that we can iterate over all of the parts of our stave. So on our for each, we'll add our switch to navigate around this operation for our UVs, and we'll go ahead and copy this parameter and paste it there again. So right now we're still going to be generating UVs. So first off, if we take a look at our switch here, we can iterate through our for each subblock by primitives or by something we have declared as pieces, and pieces can be attributes that share the same value. So in this case, we're going to say our attribute is copyNum. So for each copy that we have of our stave, we're going to be generating or offsetting the UVs for each copy. So we'll need to go to our copy and transform, and we'll just turn on our copy number attribute right here. And now, if we go ahead and take a look at our primitive attributes, we'll have a unique copy number, or each primitive will have a unique copy number for each stave that we have. So we're now grouping our incoming primitives on our for each loop by their copy number piece attribute. We'll add our UV transform node down here, like what we wanted. And let's offset this by the size X, so the bounding box of the UV scale in the X direction for our UV space. So we can just do $size X for our translation amount, just like we could if this were a in the geometry space. And we'll notice this isn't going to do anything right now. It's always going to output 0 because we're not actually iterating over each piece. This value is not increasing with each new piece. So we will need to go to the begin block and create a new meta import node. And I'm just going to call this stave meta data. And now, if we go and take a look at our details, we've got our iterations and number of iteration attributes that we can reference in our UV transform. So we'll need for each iteration it to offset in the X direction by the length and maybe then some to the right on our UV axis. We'll take size X and we'll multiply this by something like, I don't know, 1.02 to add a small space. And then we'll multiply this by the detail attribute from our stave metadata. So we'll grab stave metadata. We want the iteration attribute, and we'll set the default value to 0. And we'll see that now, if we zoom out here, our UV transform has moved quite a bit. So we'll actually want to step down here, and we'll see that now we have a straight line of all of our copies for our staves. And as the number of staves that we have decreases, our copies will also similarly decrease. And this still seems to work just fine with our bow amount and our height offsets. And again, when we get pretty low, it looks like we get some kind of slight offsets from here. I don't think that's really going to be an issue. That's kind of an extreme. So we'll say and call that one good. So that pretty much covers how to do the UVs for our staves. We can go down to the bottom here, and I'm going to add another switch. And I'm going to add a UV quick shade here to give the eventual user for my HDA the ability to see how the UVs are working on the asset. And if I take a look at our quick shade, that looks pretty good. Even as we go in scale, increase in scale, it's looking pretty nice. Again, it's taking a little bit to do, and obviously the UVs are going to go crazy when we turn our UV generation off, because it's just going to be a projection for our quick shade. So we're actually going to want to modify this switch to jump to our output. I'm just going to call this barrel out, and not use our quick shade based off of whether we have a view UV quick shade parameter here. So we'll go back to our type properties, and I'm just going to copy this toggle, and I'm going to say toggle QS for quick shade, and I'll say UV quick shade for the label. And I'll hit apply, and we'll see we have this UV quick shade. Now, I'm going to write, we don't want our UV quick shade to be usable when we don't have UVs, because obviously it can cause visual issues. So I'm just going to disable this with a short expression in here. I'll just say while toggle UVs is equal to 0, disable our UV quick shade. And now we'll see when I turn UVs off, our UV quick shade is disabled. And we'll hit accept there, that's fine. And I'll copy my UV quick shade here. And I can just set this here. I'll paste that reference in. But now we'll run into a behavior that you may not want, and I prefer it to behave better than this. I have UVs, and I'll generate a quick shade. But then I will turn UVs off, and my quick shade is still on, but I can't turn it on without turning my UV quick shade back off. And this isn't the behavior that we want to happen. So I'm going to write a quick if expression in my switch instead to help clean up some of this behavior, and maybe it will work a little bit more in our favor. So instead of our toggle quick shade right there, I'm going to write if, and we're going to grab the value of our UVs, and we're going to say if we're even generating UVs in the first place, then check and see what our UV quick shade value is. Otherwise, just continue on through to our barrel output. So we'll do toggle UVs equal to 1, so we are doing UVs. Then we'll grab the value of our UV quick shade. I'll paste that there. Oh. Go away, help text. Alright. And else we'll want to pull 0. And we'll hit enter. And so now we are generating UVs, but we're not having UV quick shade on. And now we have quick shade on, and then when I turn UVs off, we'll see UV quick shade is still selected, but our switch is still pulling through the first second value because we're not generating UVs to begin with. And this is much cleaner to work with than having UV quick shade stay on indefinitely. Alright, so now that we've got the UVs for our staves, let's go and take a look at doing the UVs for the barrel rings that we have running up and down the length of our barrel here. And I'm going to turn quick shade off, and we'll leave UVs on, and we'll dive down and take a look at our rings. So I'm going to rearrange this a little bit and make it a bit cleaner. It's fine, this guy can go over there. Maybe this down here. Alright, that's fine. And this is going to have to be maybe down a little bit. Alright, so we can do this a couple of different ways. One is, notice I don't have back faces on the inside here, so that makes our job a little bit easier. UV unwrapping closed primitives is always a little bit more work than open primitives because we already have border seams to help flatten our UVs with here. So one way we could do this is by taking our poly extrude here and making a group node and grouping our edges by a bounding box. And we could try to resize this, maybe make it thin, and we could do the bounding box of this and try to size it appropriately with our barrel, maybe move the offset here so that we're always selecting this one set of edges right here, and then UV flatten that. But this system will not always work the way that we want, because the number of edges that we have here could change, so it won't always select these edges here. We'll have to worry about flattening this side on here, and I'll just actually go ahead and show you and see how that works. So if we did a UV flatten here, and we'll see it's already working kind of okay. We're getting these rings, but they're taking up a lot of room. And even if I add my seam group and add it here, see our seam's already missing this bottom piece here. We can modify our bow amount and stretch that out a little bit. And this is actually kind of working when the barrel's more or less straight. But I really want what this bottom one is doing for each one. I want a nice straight barrel hoop UV for each of my hoops. And as my bow amount increases, I'm getting more and more curvature with all of my rings, and it seems not really working the way that I want it to. So there's probably a better way to go about doing this. And as we saw, doing this actually seems like it's almost working when the tube or my barrel is straight. So I'm actually going to hop up here a little bit, not too far. I'm going to go into my stave, and I'm just going to copy my original tube that I'm making my staves and thus my barrel shape with. I'll go back into our rings, and I'll paste that tube here. So we're going to cheat, and instead of raycasting our rings to our barrel that bows, similarly to what we did with our stave, I'm just going to copy this ray, and we're going to change the target of our ray to our straight barrel that is not bowing. So straight tube, raying to our straight tube. And notice this does not change with our bow amount. And this will make them much easier to UV unwrap than previously. So we'll copy our poly extrude as well, so that we have the exact same extrusion amount for our tubes. And we'll actually, now that they are basically a perfect cylinder, we'll just go ahead and do a UV texture, and we'll treat this as a texture type for a cylinder, and that looks much nicer and straighter despite our bow amount than what we had previously. And if we zoom in, actually, I can turn on UV overlap. So we're getting our boundary seams here, and I'll turn that off. And it's not showing it, but if I put a UV quick shade on and we take a look at the sides of our barrel, see if one lines up. So see how the letters stretch across here? We're actually not UVing the top and bottom edges of our cylinders here. But there's no border edge here, so we should be able to use the UV smooth to kind of relax or flatten out the UVs for our barrel rings. So we'll go ahead and hit the smooth, and we'll see that that's already working a lot for us. So we can probably decrease the strength of this because we want it to be proportional to how much the rings are actually set at. And maybe decrease the filter quality. I don't know. The scale around 1 seems looking like it's doing okay. Alright, so that's pretty good. We probably want to save some space on our material UVs, because eventually I'm probably going to want to texture atlas this. So we can do a UV layout, And then that will drop all of our ring loops down here to the bottom. And that looks pretty nice. And now we've got some nice looking UVs for our barrel hoops. So really, I don't need these guys anymore. We can do the same thing that we did with our barrel staves, and we'll just do an attribute copy, and we'll copy the UVs, our fixed UVs, over to our bent and bowed out geometry. And we'll do a texture UV copy, and that will work out pretty nice for us. So something I'm going to do so that I can help preview my UVs is I'm going to add a new group, and I'm just going to group all of my hoops together. I'm just going to call this my hoop group. Catchy. And I'll just call this group hoops. Alright, so what that's going to do for me is when I go down here to our quick shade area, I want to be able to see the quick shade in a different color because it kind of blends in with my barrel. And eventually, if I look at here, I've got overlapping UVs, but the barrel's going to be wood and these hoops are going to be like a metal or a steel. So they're going to be different UVs or different materials anyway. And at the end of the day, I'm going to texture atlas it anyway. So for now, I want to assign a different quick shade color to our barrel ring hoop UVs. So I'm just going to copy this quick shade and I'll paste it in here. We'll call this one the stave quick shade. And I'll call this one the hoop quick shade. And for this quick shade, we're actually going to need to grab our hoops group. We'll see it's now applying the quick shade only to our hoops geometry. I'm going to need to go up to our stave here. Let's just grab all of these guys and hop them up a little bit. And we'll add a similar group. And we'll call this group stave and stave group. And now we'll apply this quick shade to our stave group. And we can actually change which texture map. So if I wanted to like preview a simple material on my barrel, I could do that. And what I'm going to do instead is just go to my reference folder over here, and I've got some simple UVs, and I'm just going to make this the blue UV. We'll apply that, and now I've got my same UV grid that I can see, but it's now colored blue, so I can see it separate from my barrel. And the bow mount works, and we're getting a lot of lag now, so yeah, we're definitely going to turn UVs off while we preview everything. And I forgot to add the UV switch for my barrel rings, so we need to do that. We'll drag this down, make our switch, bring that into there, and then we'll copy our UV parameter for our switch input, and that should work out pretty good for us. So our UVs are all going to be kind of messed up because I'm in the middle of my UV quick shade node, but if I step out, we'll turn UVs on, and then we can see our quick shade, or turn UVs off and our quick shades go away. And our barrel is still working like it should. Really nice. And now let's take a look at doing the UV generation for the heads, or the tops and bottoms of our barrel. So we'll dive down into that and take a look at what we have here. So for our boolean is actually after our poly extrude here. That's really the head of our barrel. Everything else is just creating a copy of them and merging them together. So we really only need to apply, like similarly to our stave, UVs to one of the barrel caps, and then just that as we make copies, the UV information will still stay. So we'll drag these guys down a bit, and we'll add an off branch over here so that we can start creating some UVs. And we'll actually just go ahead and make our UV switch now. That'll be probably the easiest route. So we'll copy our UV parameter and paste that over here. And probably the best way to UV unwrap this, we'll maybe blast away the bottom primitive here, and we'll just flatten and smooth out the top. And we'll see how that works out. We may not even need to smooth out the top. So we'll grab a blast. Actually, let's group by normal. We'll be consistent, so I don't have to guess. And we'll call this the bottom faces group. Bottom faces. And instead of our base group, we'll group by normals in the negative y direction. And we'll bring this spread angle down to 0, and we'll see when I go to my group, my bottom face is now selected. So when we do our blast, I will blast away the bottom faces, and we'll say isolate top, and we'll go ahead and do a UV flatten right there. And that's actually working pretty good. We can put a UV quick shade down to see. So yeah, apart from the grain being a little off center, it's doing okay. So we can fix that pretty easily just doing a UV transform. And we'll just rotate this a bit. That looks about right. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. We'll just say 23. That looks fine. Okay. So now we'll take a look at our quick shade, and that lines up really nice. So we are probably going to have to do a layout on this. So we may not worry about transforming this anyway. So let's just not worry about it, and we'll fix it later if we need to. So now that we've got that side UV'd, we'll go ahead and let's just copy this blast, and we'll just tell this to delete non-selected, and then now this one will isolate the bottom. And for here, this is going to be pretty easy. We can probably just do a UV unwrap because a projection will look pretty nice on there. And yeah, that looks good. And again, we may need to UV transform this later, but for now it's not really a bother, so we'll just merge these back together. What are we getting here? Ah, okay. So we got to delete our quick shade. We don't need that up there anymore. And our UV flatten is generating some distortion and UV point ID parameters, which we don't need. And this won't actually cause any issues, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'll show you how to delete them if you want. So we'll just do an attribute delete, and we'll go to our vertex attributes and we'll delete distortion and UV point ID. And now the warning label on our merge node is gone. And we can turn on point numbers, and we'll see we're still getting a bunch of overlapping point numbers again, so we'll fuse these to clean up those overlapping points. Looks like we may need to pull these guys down even further a little bit. And then we can just feed this back into our switch, so we'll be using the output will appear the exact same, only one will now have proper UVs. And we can go take a look at our merge here with a UV quick shade on. Let's go ahead and turn UVs on, and this is looking pretty good, but again, we're getting those overlapping UVs like we had before. So let's see if we just do a UV layout and if that fixes all of our problems. Nope, it doesn't look like it's going to fix things for us. We'll get rid of this UV layout. And we'll come back down here to our merge, and it looks like we're going to need to do a UV transform. And on this UV transform, we'll need to scale our barrel head down a little bit. Let's say something like that. Looks like it'll be okay. And we'll just move it something like that. That should be fine. We can move it down a little bit. Maybe a little bit to the left. Alright, and we'll make another UV transform on this side. And we'll do some similar operations on this. So we'll just scale this down maybe 0.5 to keep it relatively the same shape. And then we'll offset it over the other end and maybe up a smidge. Yeah, that looks okay. So we're going to need to, if we go look at our quick shade, we get this again. So it looks like we're going to need to, for each head, offset the transformations of our bottom and top pieces. So I'm actually going to copy my UV switch here so that we're not performing this UV operation without any UVs. And we'll do a UV transform here and bring that in. And we will go ahead and just move this up so that we can see we do indeed have two different pieces. And let's actually, yeah, we're seeing both right here. And we'll add one down here, and on this transform, we'll have this just scale our guys down. And again, this may not, the space it's taking up in our material editor won't matter because I'm eventually going to redo this and UV and put them on a texture atlas. But it looks like we're getting some nice UV distribution here for our barrels, and they're lining up vertically like we want. Turn UVs off, and it's still doing what we need. And we're actually going to go drop this UV quick shade, and we'll make our barrel group so that we can apply another UV quick shade material to it at the bottom of our network. So I'll call this heads group, and we'll group heads. Alright, and now we'll go and just copy this quick shade up here and group heads, and we'll pick the green one for this. Now we'll check out our barrel progress as we have it so far, and that's looking pretty good. So now really the only thing we have left to UV is the hole that right here that's created by our bunghole. So let's go take a look at that real quick. So we'll dive down into our bunghole and see what we have going on over here. So if we recall, our bunghole is actually being made by this tube and our barrel body made from our staves and a bullion. So we should be able to just UV unwrap our tube that we've made and have the UV attributes from the points left over on the tube carry over to the faces for our bullion cutout. So let's take a look at how to do that. We're just going to move these guys up a little bit to give us some room, and this is actually going to be pretty easy. So if we put a UV project down, and we take a look at the UVs on this guy, We want cylindrical, and that's looking pretty good, actually. So we're gonna run into a small issue here because let's put a quick shade on to show my suspicions. Alright, so we got this. This is what we need, and we'll take a look when I do our Boolean that those UVs do indeed transfer, and we get this nice strip here that you can see. Again, the overlap doesn't quite matter here because we can apply this to its own group later. But this UVs seem to be transferring pretty great, but we have a issue because when I rotate or move the location of my Boolean, our UVs go all kinds of crazy, and that's because we can't update the... We would have to tie the rotation here to match the rotation of our bunghole location. And something we can do to go around this problem is actually just move our UV unwrap and our poly extrude around, and we'll do the transform operation after the poly extrude and our UVs. Now we'll just make a UV project and set it to cylindrical, and now we've got some nice UVs here. We're actually going to scale this down just a little bit until we get some nice squares. That looks good. Yeah. And then we'll see that now when we start performing our Boolean, we still get this nicely UV unwrapped, and as the location moves around, we'll go back to our quick shade, our UVs are totally fine. And we may want to have this guy, yes, he's gonna move up and down around there. So we're actually probably going to need to group this, and we'll set this as bunghole UV group. We'll go ahead and just get rid of our quick shade here, and we'll do bunghole UVs. And we'll just do a UV layout on our bunghole UVs. And that will clean up that a little bit. And then when we check out our operations here, it looks like we'll still get pretty good UVs, and it's even handling the cutout here for the when we break over into the seams of our staves. Let's go and correct island proportions. We'll turn off axis align because it was actually messing up for us, and that's looking pretty good. We'll just step back down to our fuse. And now we will go ahead and do a group delete, and we'll just go ahead and delete our bunghole UVs group that we made before because we don't need it anymore. And then we will make a new group at the bottom, and we'll call this bunghole group hole. And now when we step down into our merge, looks like we're getting some errors. Oh, we have our CompuDum attribute, so we can actually go up to here, and we'll just do an, let's see, we'll have to do it after this. So we'll do an attribute delete, and we'll delete our copy num primitive attribute. And now our merge warning is gone. We'll go ahead and copy this quick shade over again, and we'll call this whole quick shade. This one was our head quick shade. And what color do I have left? We can just give this red for now. And we'll step down to our barrel out. And we're gonna have to... okay. So, this isn't the best way to do what we're wanting to do with our group. You see, it actually may cause some issues for us because we have some overlapping geometry in our group. So, we'll actually go to our bunghole, and instead of creating this group here, we'll go in our Boolean operation, and we will actually just turn on our A inside B group and call this group whole as we had before. And now we'll only be grouping the inside faces of the bunghole cutout, which is what we want. And now we'll step out, and we've got our whole barrel UV'd. And we can turn the UVs on and off. It looks like we're going to need to go add a UV switch up here. I forgot. Apologies. These guys, move this down, and we'll set all of this as the UV nodes for our operations here. So we'll need 2 switches, it looks like. So we'll add a switch node here. Come down and do that. And we'll copy UV parameter. We'll paste that over here. And then we'll just copy this switch. And we'll hook these up just like here. And now we've got our UVs toggling like they should. Alright, I think that about covers how to procedurally unwrap this barrel. So in the next video we'll take a look at how to apply materials in place of our UV quick shades using Substance Designer.